In this episode, I want to talk about interpreting group differences by using parameter estimates and post-hoc analyses. And there are two questions I want to answer. The first is, how do you determine the significance of the values of a categorical variable? And you do it by looking at the parameter estimates and the post-hoc analyses. The second is, how do you make different comparisons among categorical variables? And you do this by changing the factors coding. So the test data I'm going to look at has a dependent variable of reaction time and a number of independent variables: type of word, word frequency, number of orthographic and phonological neighbors. The most important we're going to look at among these is the type of word. So here's how I ran the analysis in Jamovi. And here are the results, and among other things, you see that word type is significant, but we need to know how the groups within the word type differ. In a post-hoc analysis, every value is compared to every other value and evaluated statistically. The parameter estimates, when the factors coding is set to simple, compares every value to a reference value. And the reference value is the one that appears first alphabetically. So for example, the AA non-congruent is the reference value, and I put AA at the beginning of it so that it would appear first alphabetically and be used as the reference value. Now if we wanted to compare every value to every other value, we'd have to change the reference value a number of times and rerun the analysis. That's something that's not necessary in a post-hoc analysis. Once again, we could add AA to make a value first alphabetically. Well, let's look at the parameter estimates versus the results of the post-hoc analysis, and what we see is basically they're identical except the plus or minus value of t, which doesn't change the outcome at all. In this case, a post-hoc analysis is preferred because it compares all of the values. You can also account for multiple comparisons by using a Bonferroni correction. So when you're doing factors coding, what's the difference between simple and dummy coding? Well, they both compare the values to a reference level, and they really give the same results. The only difference is that when factors coding is simple, it gives the intercept as the overall mean. When the factors coding is set to dummy, it gives the intercept as the mean of the reference level. Well, comparison to a reference level sometimes makes sense. For example, if you're comparing a control group to different treatment groups, or say if you're comparing no stress to primary or secondary stress. But what if no value makes sense as a reference value? For example, what if you're comparing sonorant stops, fricatives, and affricates, or Midwest, South, Northeast, and West? In these cases, it's better to use deviation coding. In deviation coding, all of the values are compared to an overall mean, not to another value. So when we use deviation coding, what we see here is that AA non-congruent comp doesn't differ from the mean of all the other values.